in the deep cover. So
Yes,
kind of staying
yeah.
within my own theme. I just have my own themes.
I like that. No, I thought, oh, that's interesting. I love that. That was a good one.
Hmm.
Yeah, what did you? I'm just trying to see all of
What was
yours.
her name? Rebecca Strong. So
Rebecca
she
Strong,
is
yeah.
Danae out of Prince Albert. So that was interesting. And of
Oh,
course, the
really, eh?
Patients, originally done by GNR in 1989, and then Chris Cornell. He actually did it in 2016, but they didn't release it until 2020, a while after his death.
Yeah, when did he die?
I don't know.
I can't remember. After 2016, obviously, but
Yeah, he
yeah.
would have had to record that.
Well, you know how they dust off the old recordings and stuff like that. So he might have been playing around before he died. But um, what was I
I'm
gonna do?
looking.
Oh yeah, I gotta send you
2017,
something.
May 18, 2017.
Oh wow, not long thereafter.
Mhm.
Wow, jeez, what a loss. Great voice, eh? Oh my God, unbelievable
Mhm.
voice. Let me see here.
What are you looking for?
I'm looking for something to send you. Yeah, yeah. Okay. Okay. What I told you I would send before. This is the CV of the guy I talked to. All right. Okay.
Hello?
Boy, Jen, tomorrow
For
looks busy, eh? Is it tomorrow?
for
Well, for meetings
everything
or no?
is
Is it today? Today
today.
is
Tomorrow's not too
crazy, eh?
bad. Next week is
Yeah,
brutal.
yeah, it is. That's what it was. Yeah, I looked at that and it's just filled from beginning to end here.
My next week is
So,
worse than a checkerboard.
so you got an invite to that meeting in Calgary, right? The Indigenous Day Lunch and Learn.
I had to decline because I have a meeting.
You have community stuff, do you? Or
Mhm. Yeah.
oh,
So
that's too bad.
are you going to attend that?
I think so. Yeah, that's one I think our lease is going to talk at. I think, right? Isn't
Yeah,
it?
you'll have to tell me everything. I'm going to be doing Hydro One things.
Okay, guys,
Oh,
we're at
you've got
the
Hydro
2 minute
One.
mark, so I'm going to go quiet in the
Oh,
studio here. So have a good
Okay,
show, and we'll see you on the other side.
oh
thank you.
yay. I'm so excited. I haven't been on air forever.
It's been a while. Yeah, it's been quite a few. What, 4 weeks at
Mhm.
least?
Yeah, what's that saying? A hot minute?
A hot minute. Yeah,
A hot minute.
that's what people like to.
That's what people like to say, apparently.
Yeah, in a hot minute.
Yeah,
Um, let's see
very
what else.
excited.
Oh yeah, we should talk about Manitoba later on too. So that's
Oh,
still
of course.
going sideways. Okay.
Oh, we
All
need to talk
right.
to Uncle Wob.
Yes, we do. If we'd gone to that conference, we might have been able to, right? The powwow.
Yeah, he was dancing there
Jeez, I
at the
know. Yeah,
Manitowoc Festival.
remember you
Mm-hmm.
told me, and we should have been. We should have been there. Oh well, another lost opportunity.
Rubbing elbows with Uncle Wob.
Okay, almost
Less
time.
ceiling
All
fan
right.
down.
Okay.
There we go.
So I think that means be quiet. No.
Speaking in code.
Yeah,
All right.
just say it.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Don Parkinson, and I'm a Senior Consultation Specialist with Atkins Realis. Today, we are continuing our series of live stream topics on the Northern Road Link project as it moves through the provincial environmental assessment and federal impact assessment processes. The topics we are covering parallel our project activities, so we hope these will help our viewers and listeners better understand the project and provide input along the way. With me today is my usual co-host, Jennifer Ashwazagai Pereira, my colleague and an Indigenous engagement and traditional knowledge specialist at Atkins Realis. Jennifer is a member of Henvey Inlet First Nation, located on the French River south of Sudbury, and works with me on our projects across Canada. Greetings and salutations, Jen.
Anine, how are you?
I'm okay. Welcome back. You've been
Thank you.
noticeably absent the last few weeks.
MIA.
MIA. Yeah, we finally found you. You were uncovered and dusted off, and now we've got you back in the saddle again on media, and you'll be joining us, of course, for the radio show as well this afternoon. So that'll be fun as always. And so why don't we get started? Today, we're going to talk about the Cultural Heritage Resources Study Plan that we are undertaking as part of the environmental and impact assessments. So, without further ado, let's do
I
what we
present
normally
to
do
you.
and present to you the Cultural Heritage Resources Study Plan.
Nice.
So let's run through the table of contents. We do our usual project background to get everybody up to the same sort of level in terms of knowledge about the project. We're going to talk about the valued components and indicators associated with cultural heritage resources. We're going to talk about the baseline data collection methods associated with archaeological resources. We're going to talk about built heritage resources and cultural heritage landscapes. And we're going to talk about preliminary identification of potential effects. So lots of stuff going on for sure. Lots to talk about. But let's just get you going with the background or introduction to the project. The Northern Road Link is a proposed all-season road in Northern Ontario that sits on Treaty 9 land. It connects the Ring of Fire mineral deposits to the all-season highway network, ultimately through the proposed Martin Falls Community Access Road. It would also provide an opportunity for Webequie First Nation to connect to the all-season highway network, which we'll get into in more detail shortly. It's subject to both the Environmental Assessment Act, which is provincial, and the Impact Assessment Act, which is federal. The proponents are both in remote Indigenous communities, Martin Falls First Nation and Webequie First Nation. Both of these communities are about 500 kilometers north of Thunder Bay in slightly different directions. So being remote, they are not accessible by all season roads. So they have a narrow window in the winter through which they are able to transport materials and supplies by road, but that window is narrowing all the time, and it's anywhere between 4 and 6 weeks typically. There have been numerous historical studies on the road. In 2020, Ontario, Martin Falls First Nation, and Webequie First Nation did agree to work together and submit themselves to the provincial environmental assessment process for the project. In terms of the project itself, there are, and this is sometimes confusing for people, there are currently 3 all-season community road projects or all-season road projects that are in the planning stages. So they're all undergoing federal impact assessments and provincial environmental assessments. The first, or the northernmost, and the one that started first, was the Webequie Supply Road, which begins at the airport in Webequie, is planned to begin at the airport in Webequie First Nation, and then travel southeast to the McFalls Lake area east of the Muckatai River, where it would then connect with the northern end of the planned Northern Road Link Road, which would then run south and connect with the Martin Falls Community Access Road west of Martin Falls. Martin Falls Community Access Road would then extend south to link with a couple of resource roads that would be upgraded, and then ultimately those roads would connect to the provincial highway network. So that's how everything sort of fits together. In terms of the project components, the road again is planned to be an all-season road. The right-of-way is planned to be 100 meters in width. The length of the road right now could range anywhere between 117 and 164 kilometers, although that should be finalized relatively soon, based on the assessment of the alternatives, whose process is coming to a close. In terms of water crossings, there would be numerous water crossings, which would involve the use of culverts or bridges. There's one very large bridge crossing at the Attawapiskat River, which is a span of over 200 meters. And as with all roads of this nature, there is additional infrastructure associated with it. We call it ancillary infrastructure, some of which is temporary, some of which is permanent. It would include, on a temporary basis, storage and laydown areas for storage and laydown of equipment and materials during construction. There would be, and these would be permanent, maintenance facilities and yards. There would be both temporary and permanent access roads to get to facilities such as temporary or permanent aggregate sites or pits and quarries to get the material to build the road or maintain the road with. And then, of course, there would be construction camps where the workers would stay. These are typically associated with the storage and laydown areas. In terms of the alternative corridors I was talking about, remember I mentioned that I had to you remember that I had to provide a range in terms of the estimated length of the road, and the reason why is because in certain sections of the road we have different alternative road segments that are that can be chosen from. And if you see the map on your screen, for example, if you look at C, we have C1, C2, and C3. So we could select either of those three road segments, and then that would then direct sort of which segments would be chosen for D. But right now we're in the process of doing the alternatives assessment, where we do a detailed comparison, very detailed comparison of the different segments, and then technical staff and the community come to an agreement on the preferred segments. So with that provides you with a background on the project, and now we're going to dive into our topic for today, which is the Cultural Heritage Resources study plan. And as with every component of the environmental assessment, or every part of the environmental assessment, each area that we study, there are what you call valued components. These are the things that we focus on in our studies that have been identified: Indigenous communities, the general public, stakeholders, special interest groups, etc. And so there are two valued components for cultural heritage resources. And the first is archaeological resources. And then associated with this valued component of archaeological resources, we have what you call indicators. And the indicators are ways of measuring impacts. So we have 3 different types of indicators for archaeological resources, and these will probably become pretty obvious once I explain it a little bit. So the 3 indicators are registered or known archaeological sites, and burial sites, and sacred sites. So in terms of definitions, the registered or known archaeological sites, the definition of that is any property that contains an artifact or other physical evidence of past human use or activity that's of cultural heritage value or interest. So I think we have a pretty good idea of what that might include. Then we have burial sites. So burial sites are defined as land that has human remains but are not part of a formal cemetery. So that's how you define a burial site. And Jen, you and I know that, having talked to community members, that burial sites exist in many different locations,
That's right.
all over the respective traditional territories of
Territories.
both communities, right? And then there's sacred sites, and sacred sites are a little bit different. They're culturally significant to an indigenous community for maybe slightly different reasons, for social reasons, for cultural reasons, or ceremonial reasons, right, Jen? So sacred
Right.
sites,
And we would say that that would be historical as well as contemporary.
yes,
So
yeah,
the
definitely.
then and the now.
Yeah, and like sacred sites are, it's it they're harder to define exactly, right? A burial site, it's fairly easy to define. Human remains that aren't in a cemetery, but sacred sites, they're defined based on a lot of things. There's not specific criteria necessarily
Well, no, that's
associated
it.
with
And
them.
that would be primarily up to the community. It's definitely not
Yes.
our definition of what that is.
No.
It is community definition
Yes.
of what that.
Absolutely. Absolutely, right? And, and again, this is the kind of information that gets collected when the project team members sit down with community members, right, and collect Indigenous knowledge. So, um, Indigenous knowledge, is, as we've talked about before, is a very broad topic. But part of it involves things like this, right?
Hmm.
Burial sites, sites, and we'll get into this in a second. The built heritage side of things, which is another sort of hard to like nail down condition, and it's really defined by the community members. So when we talk about built heritage resources and cultural heritage landscapes, which is another valued component, um, for that we have 2 indicators. One is known or potential built heritage resources. So when we look at that, a built heritage resource is a building, structure, monument, installation of any manufactured remnant that contributes to a property's cultural heritage value or interest as defined by a community, including an Indigenous community. A known built heritage resource is a property that has recognized cultural heritage value or interest. Built heritage resources could be hunting cabins, fishing cabins, trapping cabins. Typically, those that have been held or been in the family and used by the family or clan by long periods of time, right, Jen?
Right. And something that is man-made in those
Yes.
areas,
Yep. Yep, that's right.
or
So
human-made, I
now,
should say.
or human made. Now another indicator of the built heritage resources and cultural heritage landscapes valued component. So another way of measuring impacts would be these known or potential cultural heritage landscapes. So what could that be? Now, again, this is another, it's defined really by the community members.
Hmm.
Um, so the official definition is a cultural heritage landscape is a defined geographical area that may have been modified by human activity and is identified as having cultural heritage value or interest by a community, including an Indigenous community. So the area may include features such as buildings, structures, spaces, and this is another interesting one, views, archaeological
Mm-hmm.
sites, or natural elements. So it's a big, broad definition, isn't it, Jen? So like a lookout point, right? That may have a
That's
vista,
right.
something that has significance, right? Or it could be just like any kind of natural feature, right? A wall or something that has some significance. Um, and then cultural heritage landscapes. This is another broad definition. This could include things like waterways that have historically been used as like highways for community
Highways.
members. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
prominent hills or eskers or just significant, I guess, landforms or trails or portage routes. You know, something that's been sort of, I guess, carried on through the years as of cultural significance, but it's a landscape, right? So it could also include burial sites, but it could include areas for traditional use. Um, it might have spiritual significance, a particular area. Sometimes there are areas where you don't go. That's how they have significance, right, Jen? Like I
Mm-hmm.
know when having sat down with communities many times, there are areas that are identified as places where you shouldn't go. And so these are again important things to keep in mind and to be aware of in terms of in the course of doing our environmental assessment, we need to know about these things. So it's kind
I,
of
I like to
I
call them
find,
storied places.
yeah, that's a good description. I think
Even
that's a
the
very good description, Jen.
the no-go areas, because there are stories about why
Yes,
people shouldn't go there, but we're not always privy to those stories, and that's okay. We
that's
just
right.
need to know that part.
Not to
Just
go
stay
there.
away from there.
Yes.
Yeah, don't go there. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. It's that simple. Um, so let's go back to the archaeological side. So there's two stages of reporting on the archaeological side, and the stage one side is basically a desktop or a background study. That's where it all begins. And this is more of a formal process, which is prescribed, really, I would say, is the best way to describe it. I'd say by the provincial government. And it's done by a consult archaeologist. Um, and the idea behind it is to identify whether there's potential for archaeological sites on the property or on the project area. If areas of archaeological potential are identified in a stage one assessment, then a stage two assessment is required. So again, this is a very prescriptive process that's prescribed by the provincial government. And so the tasks involved in that would be background historical research, looking at things like the physical geography of the area, the superficial geology, so like the top level of soil, like soils, and the top level of the subsurface, sources of water, where springs are, topography, so the shape of the land, how steep it is, the height, and how rapidly the land changes in height. Um, Looking at previous archaeological assessments, looking at community-based land use plans that communities may have completed or at least started, because there's a lot of that kind of work that's done as part of that process. And of course, incorporation of Indigenous knowledge is a huge part of it, to be able to gather the information to identify areas that potentially might contain archaeological sites, and then of course the mapping side of things. And then if it does advance to a stage two archaeological assessment report, that's an on the ground process, right? So that involves um, going to the actual locations and doing investigations. So walking in transects, so that's in lines um, in the area that's been identified,
A
uh,
grid.
and Yeah, exactly. And then look, what you're doing in that area, in that particular case, is looking for, um, you'd be focusing on areas where there is potential for archaeological or other kind of heritage resources, and there might be some shovel testing where some shallow holes might be dug, um, to see if there's any deposits of any kind as well. Let's see what else. Sometimes things, based on the results of the stage 2 work, if it's identified that there's potential for the project directly coming in contact with any possible archaeological resources, there can be monitoring, and I know on projects I've worked on, there is monitoring for archaeological resources where you would have, for example, community members, involved as part of the project team during construction, who would be monitoring, the archaeological side of things. So you'd have environmental monitors, and then you'd have archaeological monitors. If there was a possibility identified of maybe encountering this, typically what would happen is these areas, the road would be routed away from any areas that have been identified as having potential. But um, just to be
But
safe,
sometimes
many
during,
times,
yeah, sometimes during
uh,
construction, they come across something. And then that's
yes,
when, when we talk about mitigation measures, we talk about that a lot. There could be some cultural protocols that are put in place. I remember on
yeah.
one of my projects, there was an elder who was available to come and assist with anything needed.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you if you encountered that on, like, in the project in your community, the wind farm. Did you have someone specifically identified in that role, or you just had someone available on call, right, if something was potentially
Well,
encountered?
because it was our project, there were a few of us that were kind of on call and had the capabilities to work with anybody and around any kind of issues that would have cropped up. And fortunately, nothing did because our um, historical land use, and the archaeological assessments were thoroughly done. And we had identified
Yes.
some good burial sites as well as old village sites and a few other things that were no-go zones.
Yeah, because I mean, Jen, if you do your homework, right, and you really do it thoroughly, you can pretty well identify the areas where there's a good chance of encountering, right, artifacts. I think,
That's it.
as long as there's enough information available and you do a thorough job, you can have a pretty good idea of, I mean, like, obviously, sites close to, you know, for example, mouths of rivers and, significant areas, right, that might be frequented, like along rivers, things like that. These were the highways, and so quite
That's it.
often,
And we were able to take a few boatloads of elders to some sites to verify. So it wasn't too far
yes,
offshore. So it wasn't too difficult for some mobility issues. So elders were able to get to the spots and verify, yes, this is the area, where this occurred, or where we had a village and other things. And so those were the areas that we did stay away from, but we also didn't mark them so that we're not drawing attention to those areas, because
yeah,
sometimes
yeah,
our areas get a lot of tourists. So we don't want those
yes.
places disturbed.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And yeah, the maps where they are marked, typically those are kept, confidential, or
That's
the
right.
maps are prepared in a way that the exact location isn't revealed, right? It's sort of like a buffered
Mhm.
larger area, so you can't really tell exactly what's there. But let's move now to talk a bit about built heritage resources and cultural heritage landscapes. So in terms of some of the tasks associated in the cultural heritage report, there's provincial and federal heritage inventory and database review, sort of background work, um, review of community-based land use plans and previous reporting on cultural heritage in the area, uh, consulting with the regulatory agency and other stakeholders, Background research, huge, task, but an important one, like you said, Jen, because you want to make sure you're totally sure that you're not going to
Hmm.
get into conflict between your project and some of these significant areas. Um, Incorporating Indigenous knowledge so you're aware of these cultural heritage landscapes and built heritage resources. It's worth the effort to dig deep and talk to community members and find out what is where and really get a thorough understanding of that. Because if you do that, then it just makes the process of planning the route, such as in our case of the road, just makes it that much easier. And then put together an inventory of all these built heritage resources and cultural heritage landscapes. That'll form sort of um, a series. It serves as a constraint, basically, right? So you can figure out how to thread the road, how to position the road so it doesn't conflict with these areas that are important, that have been identified as important to community members, and then putting together the mapping, of course, too. So,
Hmm.
in terms of the field data collection, there may be the cultural heritage report that's done on the desktop might identify a need for field investigations, where you would look at trying to confirm location and condition of identified built heritage and cultural heritage landscapes. The idea is to get a better idea of what these are and where they are, and use that information to position and route the road properly, and avoid um, conflicting, I guess, impacting those important areas as much as possible. So there's different data sources, um, but again, the most important data source in areas like we're talking about is the actual community members themselves. It's not provincial databases or municipal databases because they really don't
That's
they
right.
don't
And the
they don't
provincial
keep this.
database would not have necessarily captured very much.
That's right. I mean, they may have captured old trading post locations, stuff like that, right, Jen?
Hmm.
But that's probably it, and that's not nearly the level of depth that would be needed for a project like this, where you have community members who for thousands of years have been using the territory, and building structures and temporary or permanent, and have been using these, and their whole family history is laid out all over the landscape, right? So if you don't talk to community members, you're not going to get an idea whatsoever of what is where. So IK, Indigenous knowledge, is just it's the basis for this work. It really is.
Yes, it really helps inform a lot of this.
Yeah, because in Jen, and as we move to our last slide, there are potential effects, right? There are definitely potential effects from the project. Some of these are direct, most are indirect, but there could be direct ones, which could involve, you could involve destruction of something that's. I mean, you absolutely hope that never happens, but that is a potential direct impact if it's not been flagged or identified. Um, Changing like the fabric or appearance of a sacred location, for example, right? Or a vista. That's a direct impact as well too.
Hmm.
And then there's indirect impacts like shadows created, isolating an important heritage location from its environment, so it changes the sort of context that it sits within, um, obstructing views, or affecting views or vistas, changing land use, like for example, like in the text here, like if it was a historical battlefield and you've changed that to residential use, well, the battlefield's now covered with houses. So things like that. um, Land disturbances such as changing the grade or the shape of the land, changes drainage patterns can affect important areas. in construction, direct construction impacts like from vibration to negatively affect built heritage resources. That's a possibility too. So it's a big topic, isn't it, Jen? Cultural heritage,
Oh,
cultural
it sure is.
landscapes. But it's a huge, it's an important one, and it's super, as I've said before, it's super heavily dependent on Indigenous knowledge and talking to community members and getting that information up front. Because if you don't do your homework, you're going to run into problems, right? There's going to be conflicts, and uh, that's why you have to do the research, the historical research, and talk to community members, of all different ages to be able to get that cross section of information. So, yeah, important topic. So, one that can't be ignored, right?
Never.
So, that wraps up today's discussion of the Cultural Heritage Resources Study Plan. We hope this was helpful and encourages you to join us again next week when we discuss the Climate Adaptation and Resilience Study Plan, Jen. That's going to be a big one too. All
Wow.
these big topics coming. Yeah, that's a big one. Climate change and how we plan for it. Don't forget to keep in touch with our project team members via the contact information available on our website, northernroadlink.ca. Miigwech, and make sure to look out for project updates on social media and our website.
Chimigwech.